Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll get started shortly. It is 7:02, so we're going to get started. Thanks for spending your Wednesday evening with us. We're going to have the amazing Josh Kurtz, the star journalist from Maryland Matters, covering hottest stories from Annapolis, as well as the one of the fiercest climate champions in Annapolis, Mike Tidwell, in a conversation to discuss climate change, books, and what's next for Josh as he's leaving Maryland Matters to do amazing things. I'm going to be in the back end now and let Mike take it away.
Wow, thank you, Kadest. I hope that Josh and I can live up to that billing, both of us stars. I think you take down the graphic there, Kadest, um, and and maybe show both of us. Fantastic. Welcome everyone. Again, I'm Mike Tidwell, Executive Director and founder of Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and most recently the author of the book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, a story of climate and hope on One American Street. And I want to thank all of you for coming to this conversation with Josh Kurtz, who needs no reputation for anyone who follows Maryland politics, state politics, and also follows. If you've read a story about climate change or energy emanating from our capital in Annapolis, there's a really good chance you've read Josh Kurtz's writing multiple times. So I want to thank everyone for coming. This was always meant to be kind of a cozy conversation among some of our biggest donors. I want to thank all of you for giving to CCAN, for supporting us all these years, for coming to this event tonight, for buying a ticket to this event. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with Josh. I'm going to read his bio from the Maryland Matters website. It says Maryland Matters founding editor Josh Kurtz is a veteran chronicler of Maryland politics and government. He began covering the State House in 1995 for the Gazette newspapers and has been writing about state and local politics ever since. He was an editor at Roll Call, the Capitol Hill newspaper, for 8 years, and for 8 years was the editor of E&E Daily, which covers energy and environmental policy on Capitol Hill. So that's the official bio. The Annapolis Insider bio is that nothing happens in the State House in Annapolis without Josh Kurtz knowing about it. There must be 10 of him because he seems to be in everywhere all the time. I've had the great pleasure of being interviewed by Josh on a number of pieces of legislation. He also covered an invasive vines campaign that CCAN ran in Tacoma Park, where he also lives. But Josh is one of the highest integrity reporters I've ever met, and I come from a reporting background. So it is great to have him with us. He did announce in February that he was leaving Maryland Matters, and as he will tell us, it's on. He's not quite sure. He has too many good options, I think, before him to really decide what he's doing next. But Josh, I want to welcome you to this very special conversation and fundraiser with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network.
It's great to be with you, Mike, and with everyone who's listening, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, great. Well, why don't we start out with a photograph? Cadessa, if you could put up this photograph. I just feel like this summarizes the natural ecosystem of Josh Kurtz for the last 3 decades covering the State House in Annapolis. He's got the reporter's notebook there. Josh, can you tell us, do you remember what this event was all about and what were you doing there? Where are you exactly?
So this is Lawyers Mall, which is if you haven't been to Annapolis, it's right outside the State House, and it's uh, it's where a lot of groups gather for rallies, for protests, and often for press conferences too. And I think this was when legislative leaders announced their energy package for this year's session. So it was probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 or even 4 weeks into the legislative session. And on the left side, there are some environmentalists in the kind of distance there, and it was kind of an interesting thing because there were, I don't know, 8 or 10 or 12 legislative leaders out there, but like a whole bunch of lobbyists and activists were kind of crowding around to listen in because this was going to be one of the most consequential pieces of legislation in the entire 2025 session. So, I mean, I was just there to listen and hear and and yeah, usually clutching a pen and a notebook somewhere around there.
Well, I did want to point out that Josh hangs out with or covers environmental activists a lot. There in the background is Josh Tolkien, who was uh, CCAN gave him his first job out of college, and now he's the Maryland chapter director for the Sierra Club. And the woman who you can see half her face against that sleeve, that is Brittany Baker, who's CCAN's Maryland director.
Right.
Um, and so there you are in this environmental coverage milieu. And Josh, I know for a lot of your career, you've covered energy and the environment. You were at E&E Daily for a long time. What role has environmental and climate writing meant for your career? What has drawn you to that coverage?
Um, well, I mean, it's something I've always been interested just kind of as a human being, as a citizen. But I mean, I kind of stumbled onto it accidentally at different stops along the way. I mean, I did a bunch of stories on energy when I worked in New Mexico 1,000 years ago, and then um, landed at E&E News, which if the folks who are with us tonight don't know it, it's a big news outlet in DC, though it has reporters all over the country that just covers the waterfront on energy and environmental stuff. And it's now owned by Politico, but it still has its own identity. And I was hired to actually run their congressional coverage, which so it enabled me to kind of fake it a little bit on environmental sort of policy because there were so many political elements to the congressional coverage we did. But that's how I landed there. And while I was there, and I guess we're going to talk about this, but that's when I sort of started putting together Maryland Matters. And, I was always sort of, once Maryland Matters started, I was always sort of nominally our environmental reporter, but, kind of, we were such a small operation, everybody did everything. But eventually, after we'd been operating for a few years, we got a big grant to cover climate change, and that just got me into it even deeper. So that's a semi-long answer that could have been a lot longer, but that's kind of where it
No.
is.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Kadesh, can you put up the photograph of Josh with the governor? So
Oh God.
this this is from February of this year. So from those humble beginnings that Josh just mentioned in New Mexico, all the way to February of this year, this is Josh with Governor Wes Moore. And to give you a sense of how high he had risen in his career uh, as a send off from his role at Maryland Matters, retiring from Maryland Matters, this incredible online magazine website that covers all things politics in Annapolis, that is the Bible of advocates and politicians and movers and shakers in Annapolis. As a send off, here's the governor of the state. And tell us what's happening here, Josh, and what was it like to have this event with the governor?
Yeah, it looks like I'm interviewing the governor, but in fact, he is interviewing me. And just kind of looking over my career and some of the changes that I've seen to Maryland politics and to media coverage. And I give him credit. He's pretty good he's a good talker and a good interviewer. And it was just kind of it was a fun discussion, and it was a goof to just have the tables turned on me, and it was, it was generous of him to spend that time with me. And I guess it's up, it's up somewhere on YouTube. You can find this interview. It's a goof.
Yeah, that's where we found it.
Yeah,
And why don't you take the photo down, Cadast? And Josh, 3 decades in Annapolis, you've seen everything. You've written some stories, and there are stories told in the hallways under the heading of "Only in Annapolis," would
right.
crazy things like this happen. Now, I know that you have one of the craziest stories you ever wrote was actually related to a clean energy bill that I was fighting for desperately. Tell us, who is Rick Impalaria, and how did he change the clean energy future as a Republican? How did he change the clean energy future of the state of Maryland?
Right. Well, this was well, Rick Ampalaria is now a former delegate from Baltimore County, and very conservative, and kind of, kind of well, I guess I'd describe him as like a get off the lawn, kind of get off my lawn, kind of old grouchy guy. And so this was during the debate in 2019 over a clean energy bill that was called the Clean Energy Jobs Act. And I I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but I'd gotten wind that the House Economic Matters Committee, which had jurisdiction over this bill, was going to be meeting one night, and their plan, or the chairman's plan, was they were going to kill the bill. And they didn't give any advance notice, or, when it comes to voting sessions in Annapolis, like, there is very little um, sunshine and accountability. Committees will just meet at the spur of the moment to pass something or kill something. You never know when it's going to be. But I got notice that this was about to happen, or it had just happened, and to the chairman's surprise and dismay, Impalaria voted against the motion to kill the bill. And the chairman had counted on him voting for this measure, figuring as a Republican he'd hate clean energy. But a year or two earlier, Impalaria had been busted for drunk driving in Ocean City, I think during a Maryland Association of Counties conference down there. And so he held this against the town of Ocean City. And if anyone has been following clean energy issues in Maryland knows, Ocean City officials are very opposed to the idea of wind turbines going out in the federal waters out that way. And so they've been opposing, all manner of clean energy because of that. And Impalaria, because he was still pissed about being popped for drunk driving, decided he would vote to advance the clean energy bill. And so by one vote, the bill wasn't killed at that point. And then I think, the Democrats on the committee were kind of shamed into deciding they'd need to move it, or some version of it, after all. So that was just a nutty, you know, thing that, you just kind of stumble across sometimes as you're moving through the hallways at various odd hours.
Yeah, the crazy revenge politics of a Republican
Right.
delegate in the context of offshore wind power. It's crazy. Only in Annapolis. Well, speaking of Annapolis, Josh, the first session year I think you covered was 1996.
Right.
And you recently described in an essay in Maryland Matters that experience of going down into the pit. The
Right.
pit is the basement well where all reporters hang out. It's crowded. It's
Right.
right across from the speaker's staff office,
Right.
but it's in the basement. And in 1996, describe the number of journalists, and this is a sad story you're about to hear, but
Yeah.
you're basically describing what you see in terms of the number of journalists, and then fast forward to the very different staffing and
Right.
existence of publications today.
Yeah, I mean there were easily at least a couple of dozen journalists who regularly covered the State House, particularly during General Assembly sessions. And as Mike described, many of them, the Washington Post has its own workspace, the Baltimore Sun has its own workspace, and everybody else crowds into the same office. And there were reporters from all over the state, from small papers and radio stations, papers that don't exist anymore, including the one I was working for at the time. And from that, I mean, we've now gotten to the point where there are less than half that amount there regularly, probably 10, and five are from Maryland Matters, 10 or 12. And it's that shrinkage in sort of coverage and eyes on what's going on and the accountability that brings that kind of compelled me to get Maryland Matters off the ground.
Yeah, and I've seen it too. The first year that I lobbied in Annapolis was 2002. The Baltimore Sun would have three or four reporters. The Post had two or three. And now they're lucky on any given day that there's one. The idea of a print reporter from Frederick or Hagerstown
Right.
being in Annapolis covering that just doesn't happen anymore. So a lot fewer reporters. It's really affected. It is the fourth estate. We need journalism to keep politicians honest. Um, that we know that the internet has caused the disappearance of many legacy media outlets, and lots of media legacy jobs have disappeared.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you formed Maryland Matters 8 years ago. What were you hoping to accomplish with Maryland Matters? And tell us how much you wound up accomplishing.
Well, I'll leave the how much to others maybe, but I mean, uh, this was a conversation I started having in earnest in 2014 and kind of built toward it. And we launched as a blog in 2017 and then sort of in a more substantial way in 2018. But really, I mean, really, I was just looking for, more accountability, more coverage, more accountability, more information going out there. I mean, one of the reasons I decided to start it in 2017, even though I didn't know if we'd have the funding to sustain it, was, an election year was coming up, and it just felt like, who was paying attention to what was going on and who was going to inform voters on what their elected legislators were doing, and it just felt like this was a glaring need. Now, I will have to say, um, in certain ways, the fact that we were up and running and we are, knock wood, sustainable is is fantastic, and I feel very proud about that. I probably, right now there are five full-time staffers on Maryland Matters, and and we also rely on contributors from freelancers, and we're part of a national network now, so we get to share copy with other publications around the country, which is all great. I mean, I probably, like, in my perfect world, I probably envisioned 10 or 12 full-time reporters, and we haven't gotten there yet, and maybe we will one day, but it's a function of resources more than anything. But I mean, I'm I'm really pleased in general with where we are, and I think our coverage has been, you know, important, and we've covered a lot of sort of daily events that might not have gotten covered otherwise, and we've covered, we've kind of dug into some things that doesn't that don't get covered all the time. And something like the Rick and Pilaria story is kind of illustrative of some of the stuff we do that others don't, sort of take you behind the scenes and pull back the curtain a little bit. I mean, this year we got our first office in Annapolis, so that feels like an achievement. So, this whole on state circle. So there's all kinds of things I can be proud of.
Well, I think most of the folks on this call know Maryland Matters. They've read it. They're Maryland Matters junkies like me. The coverage is amazing. It's some of the most professional and accurate coverage. It's lively, it's entertaining. Uh, uh, Everything from the annual Valentine power couples stories, who are the Annapolis power couples, and there are always some unlikely couples involved, to covering climate, covering rumors, tracking down rumors. Um, it is the Bible for legislators and for advocates like me. And I can't think of a better way to measure that success than that the governor interviews you as you retire from the publication. So,
Yeah, that was pretty neat. Yeah.
so hats off. Well, I do want to ask, Josh, what's next? Because people like me, when you shocked me while I was standing in a lobby waiting to testify on a bill in January, late January, I think, and you told me you were leaving Maryland Matters, and I nearly fell down. My
Yeah.
first question was, what's next? And I think that's what a lot of people on this call and a lot of people in Annapolis and across the state, we all know you're not finished. So, what are the possibilities, sir?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I wish I could say I'm ready to make like a LeBron-like statement about, I'm taking my talents to South Beach, but the short and real answer is I don't know. But I would like to keep writing, and I will probably certainly do some more writing for Maryland Matters down the line. And there are a few issues that particularly animate me, from climate to immigration to kind of the corrosive influence of money in politics. And I would like to do some stuff that exposes, that highlights some of those issues. So far, I've been having a bunch of conversations with a range of people, and I'm not really going in with any kind of preconceived notions or any kind of asks. But I just kind of want people to think about, what's important. But partially they're kind of gossip sessions, and I went to California for 9 weeks, so I was out of the loop for a while. So part of it is catching up, part of it is just sort of, people offering their thoughts on how I can be useful or what's going on that's important. And I feel like I'm collecting all these data points, and maybe at some point I will, have a greater plan of action. But I mean, this is sort of where I'm at right now, and I welcome everyone's suggestions.
Well, as I've told you before, we need you. We need your journalistic skills and your enormous experience, your and knowledge, your institutional knowledge. So I look forward to. I know you filed a few stories for Maryland Matters since you've left. I know
Right.
you'll continue to do that. Hopefully, there's some kind of podcast or blog or whatever happens, we know we can look forward to hearing your voice. And I will say that I was personally flattered that you reviewed my new book, The Lost Trees of Willow Avenue, A Year of Climate and Hope on One American Street, a story about climate change right here in Tacoma Park, where we both live. You reviewed the book, and so now we're going to turn the tables and Josh gets to inhabit his normal chair as the guy asking the questions. So Josh, take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you. And, Mike, thanks for writing the book, and, for giving me an advance copy, which I enjoyed reading out in California. Um, you know, w- when I heard you were doing this, I was kind of intrigued about it in sort of three different ways, because I kind of know you as a hard-charging advocate in Annapolis, and I kind of and I know that you have written books before and been a journalist in a previous life, but I kind of was wondering how this was gonna sort of tie into your day job now as a prime advocate for climate action in the DMV, or and beyond, I guess, in the whole Mid-Atlantic. So that kind of intrigued me. the Tacoma Park angle kind of intrigued me, being also a Tacoma Park resident, and I've lost some oak trees on my property over the years. And then sort of I was wondering how you were going to get from, one block in one town to sort of a bigger picture and a bigger message. So these are the things that really interested me when I started reading and thinking about your book. And so I guess, I would ask a question I'd ask any author, which is just sort of, what was the book's genesis? As simple as that.
Yeah, well, the book's genesis was I couldn't help but notice, Josh, that some of our biggest trees in Tacoma Park have been dying in the last few years, especially starting in 2019. And I was picking up fragments of information in the city newsletter and talking to arborists who were whispering, it's climate. We've never seen so many big trees die in such numbers so suddenly. And so I just decided I wanted to know exactly how climate change was killing so many of our old oak trees. And that was the genesis of the book. The story that I uncovered was so intriguing, and I realized, oh my God, climate change has gotten so advanced on this globe that you could take a spinning lacquered globe and throw a dart at it, and wherever that dart lands, you can write a whole book about the climate impacts right in that one microdot, whether it's Japan or Southern Africa or the 7100 block of Willow Avenue where I live in Tacoma Park. So it's a story that began with trees and how the record rainfall of 2018 across the entire mid-Atlantic. 2018, Maryland got 2.5 feet more rain than normal on an annual basis. That was the second Ellicott City flood happened that year. We had atmospheric rivers of rain land on the mid-Atlantic from a wobble in the jet stream, also triggered by climate change. And that rain triggered a otherwise latent mold in the soil called Phytophthora, which translates from Greek as plant destroyer. And that mold just attacked the root tips of our big old oak trees, not just in Tacoma Park, but across the mid-Atlantic. And so I tell that story about how the trees got stressed, and then ultimately it was ambrosia beetles that killed them. But it began with a wobble in the jet stream and atmospheric rivers from moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and a mold in the ground and trees dying. And that was such a fascinating story. And I thought, well, what other impacts of climate change are happening on my block? So I write about Lyme disease. Lyme disease is rampant in our neighborhood. The milder winters don't kill off the ticks they used to. Flooding is a huge problem. So, before I knew it, I realized I had enough material here for a book about one neighborhood.
And and did you have a good chunk of it written when you started pitching it to publishers? Or I've always been curious about that process, and so I'm wondering sort of when you saw it as something that you could potentially sell to a publisher.
Um, I I've had the same literary agent for over 20 years. I pitched the idea to her in the fall of 2022. She was excited about it. She suggested that I just start writing. I was more than halfway through the book before she started sending it to publishers in New York. And I have to say that, 5 years ago, even, I doubt there's a publisher in New York that would have taken this story seriously. Like, how can you prove that those trees dying in your neighborhood are climate change? But the editors in New York for major publishers are experiencing trees falling on their house and flooding. And so, a book like mine that wouldn't even get an audience with editors 5 years ago was rapidly purchased by St. Martin's. My editor, having read three-quarters of the book and offering a contract right after the contract was signed, he said, "Okay, now I'm coming down to Tacoma Park." And he took the train down from New York. He said, "I want to see this neighborhood myself." And I
Right.
thought, "Oh my God, is this editor going to think I'm exaggerating?" Like, I write about elevated sidewalks and solar panels and tree stumps from massive trees dead. But is he going to say, so what? So he came down, we walked around my neighborhood, and when we were done, he said, look, I was enthusiastic about your book when we signed the contract. Now, having come here, I'm even more enthusiastic
Wow.
about it.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to imagine that it could be that dramatic to someone who's not seen it before, but I mean that says a lot right there. And the fact that you could sell it when even 5 years ago, as you said, you couldn't. I mean, that says a lot right there too. Did you, I mean, when you were writing, did you have a particular audience in mind, or I mean, how, how do you think about an audience when you're writing a book like this?
Well, Josh, I mean, serious writers, it's a compulsion.
Right,
We have to
right.
do it. We've been doing it since we were very young. We can't not do it. And we really, first and foremost, write for ourselves, and then the adage is quality is its own reward. You just try to do your best. Hopefully you get some readers. Um, I think the audience that I had in mind is ultimately the audience that I think is accrued for the book. A writer for Publishers Weekly magazine wrote an advanced review of the book and then called me up and did a feature based in Houston. She was based in Houston because she had lost a bunch of giant trees in her yard. And of course, her house had been flooded from all the extreme rains that Texas has seen. So the audience I had in mind were people who, like us, were seeing climate change outside their front doors.
I, I imagine one of the things that I found, uh, I didn't know what to expect when I was reading it, but one of the things that kind of delighted me was that you spotlight different individuals in the book. And, a couple of them are, familiar elected officials in the Tacoma Park area, but, you had you had arborists, you had tree experts, you had just neighbors of yours, you had the pastor of your church that has experienced a terrible amount of flooding. I mean, how did you, maybe you could talk for a couple of minutes about some of the characters in your book and how you decided to spotlight these particular individuals and the work they're doing, whether it's literally in their yards or kind of on a broader policy level.
Yeah, and I just put a link to the book. I think most people here, as part of your ticket, you get a copy of the book. Um, But yeah, I mean the characters in a lot of people think about this book and at first they think, this sounds boring. Why do I want to hear about some guy's shrubs that are dying from drought or whatever that he claims is climate change in his front yard? But as I started to write the book, I just realized there were just so many people in a dramatic struggle with climate change, as unlikely as that seems. But everyone from the midwife who lives across the street from me, who has also had Lyme disease, who has put a geothermal system in their backyard, who has delivered 800 babies, and every night she worries about their future in a climate stress world, to my pastor who is just trying to keep water out of the basement of Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church. We've been getting so much rain. The boiler room is flooded. Water has started to leak into the preschool in the basement. And the dying trees, the cascading impacts of climate change in one square block are occurring such that as these really big trees die on Willow Avenue, the slope heads toward my church on Tulip Avenue. And so extreme precipitation events are killing our trees, and the disappearance of those trees is compounding the flood problem because those trees are the number one things you need to absorb extreme rain with their roots and with their canopies. And so our church had to have the city of Tacoma Park spent $45,000. I write about this in the book, bussing up a perfectly good sidewalk on half the block on Tulip Avenue on the church side, bringing in 30 tons of soil and then repaving that sidewalk, not because we needed a new sidewalk, but they created a flood berm. It literally is an elevated sidewalk to serve as a kind of flood levee to keep the church dry. I didn't know that was happening when I started writing the book, which then led me to interview the pastor who has his own very interesting story. So, what this is like, Josh, when you really get into a story, after a while, you're just racing to keep up with your sources, racing to keep up with the great quotes you get from the characters you meet.
Yeah, I mean that was to me that was a noteworthy aspect of the book because it almost seemed like their stories sort of propelled the narrative. It's sort of like, okay, I'm gonna focus on this street and these problems, and then but then everyone had a story to tell that was, you're almost kind of building blocks of the broader narrative. So, I thought that was very cool. Um, one of the I mean, I'm sure most of the folks on this call are familiar with the work of Delegate Laura Charkoudian and Congressman Jamie Raskin, who are just, local heroes, basically. Um, but there was, um, there were, you kind of bravely discussed your own struggles with Lyme disease over the years and how it's you know sapped your energy at times and changed the way you've thought about a lot of issues. And you kind of you sought to draw links between this, which is clearly a personal trauma, with at least the personal traumas of Congressman Raskin and Delegate Charkoudian. Um, and that was kind of an interesting, um, I wouldn't say a sidelight to the narrative, but I thought it really made the story more compelling. And could you sort of talk about, you know, why you did that, how you did that, and how you sort of saw that as being part of the story?
Yeah, my editor at St. Martin's, by the time he was done reading the book, he said, "You have a lot of heroes. You have more heroes than the average person." And I guess I do. Uh, just people I look up to, frankly, including you, Josh, for all your great writing. But Jamie Raskin lives 2 blocks from me. Um, he too, when I started interviewing him, he started telling me, I mean, he grew up in DC. And he was just, I said, tell me the climate change you've seen in your lifetime. And he's, I think, just 1 year younger than me. So I think he's 62. Um, and he just talks about how there were always snow days in DC when he was a kid and they're gone. How he went to a summer camp on the eastern shore of Maryland, where they would kayak and swim in the bay, Echo Hill. And now he sent his kids there 30 years later, and they would have heat days where they would just, like, no one could go in the water and they'd go to the movies instead, because the water was toxic and the heat was dangerous. And you know, Jamie has also fought cancer, lymphoma successfully, but he was going through chemo in 2023 when I was writing the bulk of the book, and still had incredible energy. But I told him that one of my things I write about in the book is that I think most people have heard of this idea of forest bathing, this Japanese concept of being among trees and having a sense of well-being. And it's not just a sense of well-being, but being around trees, human beings' stress levels go down, their cortisol levels go down, their immune systems are boosted. And trees, first of all, are just amazing creatures. We think of them as silent and static, and they're not. They talk above ground to each other. They talk below ground through their roots. Adult trees prefer to live next to their offspring. They share nutrients underground. Trees sleep. They can tell time. They feel pain. And I write about all these characteristics. And trees are our friends, and they help our health. And one of the things I write about is if trees help boost our immune system, like patients in hospitals, there's studies that show that a patient that can look through a window and see a tree will recover faster than one who can't see a tree. And so I argue that if trees are helpful to our health when they're there, what happens when they disappear? And I think that's one of the reasons why, one of the factors perhaps that so many people are getting Lyme disease and other illnesses, in part is we've lost that connection to the natural world in my book, as highlighted by our declining trees. And Laura Charkoudian, our great delegate, and we'll show some photographs here in a minute of her next to an offshore wind farm. But she's, in every life, rain is going to fall. And Laura has been a great star. There must be 10 of her because she never stops working. But she opened up to me as I was interviewing her about her advocacy and her background. She's Armenian. Her grandparents barely survived the Armenian genocide early in the 20th century. And then she opened up to me about the domestic abuse that she was a victim of in her previous marriage, and how, she had to overcome that and still keep the public interest at the forefront of her career. And people like that, people like her and Jamie Raskin, who through all their personal tragedies and personal challenges, still keep the public interest at the forefront of everything they do when they get up in the morning. It's just awe-inspiring. And it was a privilege for me to interview them and write about them in this book.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was one of the most noteworthy things. And what you were just saying now about sort of the healing effects of trees and how trees behave above and below ground, I thought was also interesting because it was it was a mix of the scientific and the spiritual, and I mean, that I thought you did a great job of sort of weaving those two together. And I don't know if that's something you kind of planned when you started, or whether that just kind of followed along as you started the writing process.
Well, the book turned out nothing like I thought it would. I mean,
Well,
honest.
let's talk about that. Tell us more about that.
Well, how about I do that while we show a few photographs while we
Sure.
still can? So,
Yeah.
Kadesh, why don't you know, I'll tell you, this first photograph is one of the main reasons I decided to write the book. This is the
Um,
Miller family. They live right across the street from me. That's Dave and Lisa Miller and their son Wesley. That's the remains of a 150-year-old Southern red oak
wow.
that died. After the rains of 2018, it went into steep decline. It was finally cut down in 2021. And their story of grieving, the ceremony that they conducted when their tree died. Um, one arborist told me when a tree dies in a national forest, it's just a number, it's a statistic. When it dies in your backyard, it's a friend.
Yeah.
And their story, they were the first people I interviewed for this book in November of 2022. And they just inspired me. Why don't we keep going next, Kadest? Um, this is a very common sight in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Men working in trees. That house right there, that White House is at the corner of Willow and Tulip Avenues. It's literally a few hundred feet from my home. If you had taken that photograph 5 years ago, it would have been surrounded by really, really old oak trees, four or five of them that are now gone. And again, it's not me saying it's climate change that's killing these trees. It's arborists who are saying extreme weather linked to climate change is causing this decline. Next, flooding. This is Tacoma Park on September 10, 2020. We get
Ooh.
more and more extreme rainfall events. Next.
Is that on your block, Mike?
No, that is Westmoreland.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
go back, Cadet. One more. Yeah, that
Yeah.
is Westmoreland looking up from Elm.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
we got
Okay.
5 inches of rain in 1 hour in Tacoma Park. That's when Highway 50 inside the Beltway completely went underwater.
Right.
Um, next. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the sidewalk outside my church. If you don't know what you're looking for, you wouldn't know that that's a flood berm. But if you'd taken this photograph 3 years ago, that sidewalk was almost even with the curb.
Right.
And so it's been elevated to keep water out of our basement. And it's a constant struggle with the city of Tacoma Park. Next. This is so many trees are dying in the mid-Atlantic. This is like a tree boneyard in Baltimore called Camp Small. The city of Baltimore has a policy of not sending dead trees to the landfill and not incinerating them, and they try to repurpose them as like wood chips for playground cover or furniture, but there's just too many. They're overwhelmed and they're piling up. At places like this across the state. And I write about this very interesting professor, Dr. Ning Zhang at University of Maryland, climate scientist, who wants to bury these trees and sequester their carbon in low oxygen clay. And so in this neighborhood, my neighborhood, he lives on the edge of Tacoma Park, and this neighborhood where people are grieving, and the tree stumps are like tombstones. We feel like we live in a cemetery sometimes from lost friends. Here comes this Undertaker character, Ning Zhang, who wants to bury trees like this. Next. This is a beautiful pen oak in my backyard. This tree is a character in the book. You know, it survived all the extreme, not just rainfall, but droughts. We have sharper and sharper droughts in the mid-Atlantic. It's still healthy, but you know, all of us in Tacoma Park and across the mid-Atlantic, the big trees we still have, we don't know how much longer they're going to last. Next. Um, Canadian wildfire smoke. Again, I didn't know this was going to happen, Josh, when I started writing the book.
Right.
I decided I was going to cover one calendar year of climate change on my block, and this is June of 2023, June 8th, when Washington, D.C. had the worst air quality of any city in the world. And on a normal day from my seventh floor office where this photo was taken, on a normal day, you'd see the Washington Monument to the left looking into D.C. and the National Cathedral on the right. And of course, you can't see more than 3 blocks in this photo.
Wow.
Next. Um, you know, another tree on my square block, a 150-year-old willow oak, that's my neighbor Pat, that came down in an extreme windstorm on July 29th, 2023. Just a massive, massive tree. Next. There's Laura Chakoudian right there at the bottom. In my book, the word hope is in the subtitle, A Year of Climate and Hope on One American Street. Laura lives just a few blocks from my house. She's my delegate in the House of Delegates. Josh knows her. He's interviewed her and covered her. She's a great champion for clean energy. And she and I went with Jamie DeMarco, who's now a lobbyist in Annapolis, rode a boat 27 miles out to a wind farm being built off the coast of Virginia Beach, Virginia. When that wind farm is completed and Donald Trump cannot stop it, it's being built as we speak. It will generate enough clean energy equal to taking 1 million cars off the road. So that's happening, and that's part of the hope story in the book. Next. Um, when big trees come down in my neighborhood, I talk about how one of two things happen. Solar panels go up on suddenly sunny rooftops, or gardens happen. And this is my neighbor Dorothy, and we plant a vegetable garden after we lost that 80-year-old willow oak on our block in July of 2023. And I'll conclude with this. This is the most beautiful tree, I think, in all of Tacoma Park. It's a post oak. It's at least 150 years old. It's right on the corner of Tulip and Willow. It's in amazing condition, healthy. But again, we walk by it every day wondering, is this its last year, with rising higher and higher temperatures, stronger and stronger storms? And you know, one arborist told me, Mike, our native trees in the mid-Atlantic are no longer native. We've changed the climate, and so they're foreigners now. We shouldn't be surprised that they're getting sick and dying. And I argue that if our native trees are foreigners, what does that make us, human beings? We're foreigners too, and we might want to use that wake-up call to take more action. So those are a few photos.
Well, I mean, I think those photos are really illustrative and tell part of the tale for sure. Um, I, you know, I mean, just as a postscript to what you just said about our native trees not being native anymore, as I think I mentioned, we lost a few oaks where we live, and the city arborist suggested we replace them with swamp trees, and that's what we've done, and because that is the climate we're facing now. I mean, we're more akin to like a Mississippi or something like that, climate wise, which is just mind blowing when you think about it. Um,
One of the most common oak trees now planted in Tacoma Park is a swamp white oak, which
Yeah,
I've planted in my front yard as well. It's
yeah,
climate adaptation.
yeah. Um, I guess you know, while I was reading, I was thinking about the message in the book, and it seems to me that there were a few, but I mean, I wanted to kind of lay out my theory of the case, but also, obviously you're the author, so it seemed to me that there, you know, I mean, as you said at the beginning of the conversation about the book, it's like you could spin the globe anywhere and see the ravages of climate change. And I mean, I think that's very important. And I think people don't always get that because, they may see a tsunami on TV or, the wildfires in Maui or LA or something like that. And they don't realize that it's happening at just as rapid and destructive a pace on their own streets. And I think your book did a great job of pointing that out. And kind of hand in glove with that, it pointed out that climate advocacy can happen at a very micro and local level too, and that it's important. But also, and this didn't surprise me knowing you and your advocacy, I mean, you also, it was also a call for collective action and for pressuring our policymakers to do more and do better. So I kind of wanted to ask you sort of what you thought the message was, and you call it a message of a book of hope and a message of hope, and it was. But I mean, you wrote the book some time ago already, and are you as hopeful now?
That's a good question. Yeah, this book went to press 2 weeks after Trump was elected,
Hmm.
and I write about the election in the postscript, and I basically say what I've said on this call, and that is the clean energy revolution is unstoppable. That may not seem like it, but every day around the world, human beings deploy 1 gigawatt of solar power, which is the equivalent of a major nuclear power plant of solar every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every day. Solar is a disruptive energy source. It's disrupting the gas industry in California right now. Gas combustion has gone down 40% in California just in the last 4 months because so much solar has been built, coupled with battery storage, that it is gas is the days of gas are limited in the fourth largest economy, I think now, fourth or fifth largest
Yeah.
economy in the world, California. Texas, the same. So much solar has been built and battery storage that it's finally stabilized the crazily erratic grid in Texas, but way beyond in the rest of the world. In China, this year, the largest automobile market in the world, China, half of all cars there will be either plug-in electric cars or full electric battery cars this year. That's happening. Australia, by 2030, will have nearly 100% clean energy grid in a country known for coal. The European Union is on track to cut their greenhouse gas emissions in half compared to 1992 levels, which was their Paris Climate Treaty goal of 2015. So they're staying on track. So Trump can't stop any of that. And so
Hmm.
yes, I'm optimistic. Now he's slowing us down, and it's painful to see him roll back a lot. But again, he's not going to stop Maryland. He's not going to stop the other blue states, California, New England, etc. So yes, I'm optimistic that the clean energy revolution is unstoppable. But we're also going to have to do things like achieve negative emissions, like Professor Ning Zhang, and sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, planting trees, burying dead trees, creating machines that suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, perhaps even reflecting sunlight away from the planet, geoengineering, which is a theme I touch on in the book. So I'm optimistic. I would say it's more like, and I told it to my sports crazed son when he was like 12 years old. Um, can we stabilize the climate? Absolutely. Has a football team ever come back from being down 3 touchdowns with no timeouts with 2 minutes left? Yes, it's happened. What does it take? It takes great leadership. We need leaders. It takes great teamwork. We've all got to work together. and maybe takes a little bit of luck. I think maybe we got to be a little lucky, but yes, I'm hopeful.
Um, you know, I don't know how you want to close this out, but since we're both sort of creatures of Annapolis, and we've seen how the sausage gets made, and it's often pretty ugly, or pretty amusing, as in the case of Rick and Pilaria. But I mean, I guess the thing I wonder about, and the thing I would ask you is, do you think our policymakers have a sufficient, particularly in Maryland, have a sufficient sense of urgency? And, I always, you know, yes, Maryland is a blue state. Yes, there are progressive leaders in Maryland, but, progress on a variety of fronts just always seems so glacial. And so I wonder what your take on that is.
Yeah, and I
I
will
don't mean to
say,
get you in trouble, Mike, or anything.
I will say in closing that Josh's review of my book, which you can find online, um, he starts out by saying, I've only known Mike as this hyper committed and aggressive lobbyist who doesn't suffer fools well,
Right.
and has enormous impatience for lawmakers who don't get it. And then he wound up writing a book that was less like that and was more
Right.
poetry and on the more kind of beautiful side. And I did try to
Right.
bring that to the book. But to answer your question, no, there is not a sufficient sense of urgency. But we've done a lot, even with this General Assembly, and we continue to do a lot of good stuff passed just this year. Um, and I will say to everyone on this call as we close out, what you probably already know, and I say it in the book that individual choices are great. A lot of the polluting industries, they want us to focus on recycling and focus on becoming a vegetarian and turning the lights out and all that. Because as long as we just focus on these little individual choices, the polluters don't have to worry. And the way we really solve climate change is stop being individuals, stop focusing only on individual choices, and instead be part of a group, be part of a movement. And the simplest way to do that is just pick one group in your region, your state, your county that is focused on climate change and develop a relationship with that group. Go online, get their email alerts, donate money if you can, learn about when the next vote on the city council is or the next rally on Capitol Hill. Uh, Certainly CCAN will spam you and to the point that you'll know about all this stuff wherever you live. And that's the key. And so, no, not enough urgency in Annapolis or really any state house or on Capitol Hill sufficient to the problem, but a tremendous amount of awareness. The climate lobby is pretty powerful in Annapolis. We're heard. We don't get everything we want. No one does. But with the help of individuals like you on this call joining this movement, I think we can make more progress. And speaking of progress, we have progressed to the end of this hour. And Josh, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you joining this call. I know, the funders who've been on this call have been texting me and chatting how much they've enjoyed this. Thank you for everything you've done in your career. Thank you for what I know you're going to do to shine light on our elected officials and bring attention to the policies that matter in this state. Really want to thank you for all that and look forward to what's next for you.
Well, I've enjoyed this chat and I really appreciate, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. Thank you. Thanks for all the praise, but congratulations on the book. And it's been great to chat with you all.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us on this incredibly beautiful June evening when you could have been doing a million other things. Thanks for joining us and having this, being part of this really interesting conversation. And we will see you all next time. Thanks again.